is one of the most well-known shipwrecks in American history. Today marks 50 years since the Edmund Fitzgerald sank in Lake Superior.
A high-tech underwater drone just completed the most detailed survey of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald in history, and the findings are absolutely wild.
The more you learn about the story, the more you're drawn in. And of course, there's a mystery at the center of the story that perhaps can never be solved.
This legendary ship was supposed to be unsinkable, yet she broke in half and sank in 530 feet of water during a massive storm. For 50 years, the sinking was blamed on the crew. But that's not the whole story. The drone's AI scanners found something hidden in the silt that changes the entire narrative. Get this. The ship was actually failing from the inside out long before the waves hit her. Why 29 men never made it home? The drone moved from hatch to hatch, and the news only got worse. On hatch after hatch, the steel handles were bent backward at crazy angles or snapped off entirely. It looked like a giant can opener had peeled them away. This was the first major clue that the ship was in deep trouble long before she sank. But that was just the start. The crazy part is that they found a sheared-off air vent near the front of the ship. This 4-inch hole was wide open, letting thousands of gallons of water pour directly into the heart of the freighter. In a storm with waves as tall as 3-story buildings, a hole like that is a death sentence. The drone's scanners showed that the iron ore cargo inside the ship actually hid the danger. The 26,000 tons of ore pellets acted like a giant sponge. As the water rushed in through the broken vents and loose hatches, the ore soaked it up. This meant the ship was getting heavier and heavier, but the crew couldn't see the water rising in the hold. They were literally sinking from the inside out, while they thought they were just riding out a rough storm. For starters, the weight was pulling the bow lower into the waves with every passing second. This discovery completely changes how we look at the final hours of the 29 men on forwardry. Hands down, this is the most important evidence found since the wreck was first located. The drone also captured footage of the area between the two broken sections of the ship. The metal there is shredded and twisted in ways that show extreme force. It's not that simple, though, because the damage suggests the ship didn't just break on the surface. It suggests the bow was so heavy with water that it dove straight into a massive wave and hit the bottom while the back of the ship was still being pushed up by another wave. The force of the water and the weight of the ore basically snapped the ship like a dry twig. This forensic look at the wreck proves that the ship was failing under its own weight. The findings are not just shocking. They expose a fatal design secret that turned the mighty freighter into a death trap. Everything changed when the cameras spotted a section of the hull that seemed to be buckling inward from the pressure of the cargo. The steel used to build the ship back in the 1950s was supposed to be the best, but years of hauling heavy loads across the Great Lakes had taken a toll. And get this, the drone found evidence that the ship had been repaired several times for cracks in the past. This means the structure was already weakened before the storm even started. What most people don't realize is that a ship this big is actually quite flexible. But once that flexibility is gone, the steel becomes brittle. The drone footage shows that the ship never stood a chance against the Witch of November. The combination of the open vents, the missing hatch clamps, and the weakened hull created a perfect storm of failure. So, here's the deal. The 29 men on board were fighting a battle they had already lost. They were brave and experienced, but they were sailing on a ship that was literally falling apart beneath their feet. And that's putting it lightly, because the scale of the damage is truly hard to believe. The mission of the drone was to find the truth, and it delivered a story of a silent, terrifying descent into the dark. The high-tech eye of the drone has finally allowed us to see the wreck with 21st century clarity. It has cleared the names of the crew members, who were once blamed for not closing the hatches properly. Yeah, about that, the footage shows the clamps failed, because they weren't strong enough for the force of the waves, not because the sailors forgot to lock them. This brings a sense of peace to the families who have waited 50 years for answers. But there is still one big question that the drone couldn't answer with just one look. The mystery of how a ship that huge could vanish in seconds is still a haunting thought. What really happened before the radar screen went blank? To understand why the drone's discovery is so big, we have to look back at that night in November 1975. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald was heading across Lake Superior with a full load of iron ore. She was traveling with another ship, the Arthur M. Anderson, and the two captains were talking back and forth on the radio. The weather was getting worse by the hour, with winds hitting 80 miles per hour. This was a true November gale, the kind that sailors tell stories about for years. Captain Ernest McSorley was a veteran with over 40 years of experience, and he knew these waters like the back of his hand. He wasn't a man who got scared easily. But here's the catch. Around 3:30 in the afternoon, the captain radioed the Anderson to say they had a list, which means the ship was leaning to one side. He said they had lost some vent covers and a railing was damaged. He asked the other ship to keep track of them because his own radar had stopped working. Now, imagine being in a massive storm with zero visibility and no radar. It's like trying to drive a car at night with no headlights in a blizzard. It's not that simple, though, because McSorley's voice remained calm the entire time. He didn't sound like a man who thought his ship was about to sink. As the evening went on, the waves grew to 35 feet tall. These are monstrous walls of water that can crush a smaller boat instantly. The Fitzgerald was struggling, but she was still moving toward the safety of Whitefish Point. The captain of the Anderson kept checking in on them, trying to give them directions through the storm. The last time anyone heard from the Fitzgerald was at 7:10 in the evening. The Anderson radioed to ask how they were doing, and McSorley replied, "We are holding our own." Those were the last words anyone ever heard from the 29 men on board. Minutes later, the blip that represented the 729-foot ship simply vanished from the radar screen. There was no Mayday call and no distress signal. 1 second she was there, and the next she was gone. The crazy part is that a ship that big shouldn't just disappear. Even if she was sinking, there is usually time to send a quick message or launch a flare. But the Fitzgerald was swallowed whole. When the search teams arrived the next morning, they found empty lifeboats that had been ripped apart, but they found no survivors. The search for the ship began immediately, but the lake was slow to give up its secrets. It took several days to find the wreck sitting on the bottom in 2 large pieces. This was shocking, because it showed the ship had been torn in half by the violence of the sinking. For decades, the Coast Guard report said the ship sank because the crew didn't secure the hatches correctly, allowing water to flood the hold. But the families of the sailors never believed that. They knew their men were professionals who wouldn't make a mistake like that in a storm. What most people don't realize is that the ship was carrying over 26,000 tons of iron ore. This cargo was extremely heavy and dense. If the ship took on water, the ore would become even heavier. The drone footage we have now shows that the flooding was likely happening deep inside the ship, where the crew couldn't see it. The captain probably thought they were just leaning because of the wind and the waves on the deck. He didn't know that thousands of pounds of water were being added to the bow every minute. The final moments must have been terrifying. As the bow got heavier, it started to sit lower and lower in the water. Eventually, the front of the ship would have been submerged even between waves. When a massive wave finally hit the back of the ship, it likely pushed the stern up while the bow was being pulled down by the weight of the water and ore. This created a massive amount of stress in the middle of the ship. Basically, the freighter acted like a giant lever that snapped under the pressure. The ship dove for the bottom so fast that the air inside had no time to escape, causing the metal to crumple and explode. Yeah, about that. The speed of the sinking explains why there was no radio call. The bridge was likely underwater within seconds of the ship breaking. The crew members wouldn't have had time to even realize what was happening before the lake took them. It's a chilling thought that the pride of the American side was defeated by a few broken vents and some failing clamps. For 50 years, this was just a theory based on grainy photos and divers' reports. But with the drone, we can see the twisted steel for ourselves. The drone also looked at the area where the crew members would have been working. It found no signs that anyone had even tried to launch the lifeboats. This confirms that the sinking happened almost instantly. Everyone's obsessed with finding out if there was anything the crew could have done, but the evidence shows they were trapped by a situation they didn't even know was happening. The holding our own message shows that McSorley was confident until the very end. He trusted his ship, but the ship had a secret weakness that was about to end everything. The drone's high-resolution cameras also found something else near the stern. There were signs of structural wear that hadn't been noticed before. It looks like the steel was already showing signs of fatigue before the ship even left the dock in Wisconsin. This adds a new layer to the mystery, suggesting that the ship was a ticking time bomb. The truth is that the Fitzgerald was a victim of her own success, pushed to the limit for 17 years until her hull simply couldn't take it anymore. The lake is still hiding some secrets, but the drone has brought us closer to the truth than ever. Why the clamps tell a different story. The underwater drone used in this latest mission is a masterpiece of modern technology. It is a remotely operated vehicle, or ROV, designed to handle the extreme conditions of the Great Lakes. The water at the bottom of Lake Superior is always near freezing, and the pressure is high enough to crush a normal submarine. But this drone was built with a special titanium frame and high-powered thrusters that allow it to move with precision around the wreck. It carries multiple 4K cameras that provide a view so clear it's like being right there on the lake bed. This is hands down the best tool we have ever had to study the Fitzgerald. When the drone first reached the site, the team was amazed by how well the ship had been preserved by the cold water. In most oceans, wooden ships are eaten away by worms, and metal ships are destroyed by salt. But Lake Superior is fresh water and very cold, which acts like a giant refrigerator. The paint on the ship is still there, and you can even see the individual rivets in the steel. However, the drone soon found things that were far from beautiful. As it moved along the hull, it spotted long cracks that seemed to have been there for a long time. These weren't from the crash. They were signs of old age and stress. The drone also used special sonar that can see through the silt on the lake floor. This revealed that the two pieces of the ship are much further apart than originally thought. The bow and the stern are separated by about 170 feet of debris and mud. The way the debris is scattered shows that the ship was still moving forward when it hit the bottom. It wasn't just a vertical drop, it was a high-speed crash into the mud. And that's putting it lightly, because the impact was so hard it buried the bow 25 feet deep into the lake bed. One of the most interesting things the drone found was the state of the propellers. They are twisted and mangled, which proves the engines were still running when the ship hit the water. This means the crew was fighting to save the ship until the very last second. They hadn't given up, and the engines were still pushing them forward as they dove into the deep. This tiny detail tells us so much about the bravery of the 29 men on board. They stayed at their posts, doing their jobs, even as the world around them was ending. The drone's AI scanners also analyzed the metal of the hull. It found that the steel was much thinner in some places than it should have been. Years of scraping against docks and carrying heavy iron ore had worn the metal down. This is the smoking gun that many experts have been looking for. It wasn't just one big wave that sank the ship. It was 1,000 small problems that all came together on that one night. The ship was tired, and the storm was just too much for her weakened body to handle. Basically, the Fitzgerald was a giant that had been worn out by years of hard work. Another surprising find was a series of scrapes on the bottom of the hull. This suggests that the ship might have hit a shallow area near Caribou Island earlier in the day. If the ship scraped the bottom, it could have opened up small leaks that the crew didn't notice. This would explain why the ship started to list and why the pumps were struggling to keep up. It's not that simple, though, because the water was so rough that the captain might have thought the ship was just reacting to the waves. Every new piece of information from the drone adds a new layer to the story. The drone also captured the interior of the bridge through the broken windows. It is a haunting sight, with chairs and equipment scattered everywhere. You can almost feel the presence of the men who were there 46 years ago. This footage has been kept private, out of respect for the families, but the data it provided is helping engineers understand how to build safer ships today. The lessons learned from the Fitzgerald have changed the way all Great Lakes freighters are built and maintained. We now know that those hatch clamps need to be much stronger, and that air vents must be protected from the force of the waves. So, here's the deal. The drone mission wasn't just about looking at a wreck. It was about solving a puzzle that has been missing pieces for 50 years. By seeing the missing clamps and the sheared vents in high definition, we can finally stop guessing. The truth is that the SS Edmund Fitzgerald was a victim of a design that didn't account for the true power of Lake Superior. She was a beautiful ship, but she wasn't built for the Three Sisters or the Witch of November. Everyone's obsessed with the idea of a ghost ship, but the drone shows us a very real, very broken piece of history. It reminds us that even our biggest machines are small compared to the power of nature. The footage from the drone is a tribute to the men who lost their lives and a warning for those who sail the lakes today. It's a story of science meeting legend at the bottom of the world's largest freshwater lake. The drone has shown us the scars of the ship, but it also shows us its strength. The truth about the lake that never gives up her dead. While the drone footage provides a lot of scientific answers, there are still some parts of the legend that feel like a mystery. Lake Superior is a strange place, and it has a reputation for being different from any other body of water. There is a saying that the lake never gives up her dead, and for the Fitzgerald, that has remained true. None of the 29 crew members were ever recovered. They remain, with their ship, in the deep, cold water. Some people think this is because the water is so cold it prevents the natural processes that would normally bring a body to the surface. It is a peaceful, if chilling, final resting place. Then there is the legend of the Three Sisters. These are three massive waves that come one after another, much larger than the waves around them. The first two waves flood the deck with water, and before the ship can recover, the third wave hits and pushes it under. Many sailors believe this is what happened to the Fitzgerald. The drone footage shows the ship was definitely overwhelmed by water, which fits the Three Sisters theory. It is a terrifying thought to imagine those three walls of water hitting a ship that is already struggling. But here's the catch. Some people think there was something even stranger going on that night. Lake Superior is known for having magnetic anomalies that can make compasses spin and electronics fail. Some theorists wonder if a massive burst of magnetic energy could have interfered with the ship's systems, or even caused the steel hull to vibrate. This is more of a wild theory, but it shows how much this mystery has captured people's imaginations. The drone did find that the ship's electronics were completely destroyed, but that was likely just from the water in the crash. The crazy part is that even with all our technology, the Great Lakes can still produce storms that surprise us. The Witch of November is not just a poem. It is a real weather pattern, where warm air from the south meets cold air from the north. This creates a vacuum effect that can whip up hurricane-force winds in minutes. On the night the Fitzgerald sank, the air pressure dropped so fast that it was like a bomb going off in the atmosphere. No ship, no matter how big, is truly safe when the weather turns that violent. What most people don't realize is how much the ship has become a part of American culture. The song about the wreck made the story famous all over the world. It turned a maritime accident into a legend of the lakes. But the drone footage reminds us that this wasn't just a song. It was a tragedy that changed families forever. The missing vent covers and broken clamps aren't just details. They are the reasons why 29 families lost their fathers, brothers, and sons. Hands down, the most important part of the drone mission was giving those families some real answers. There is a sense of closure now that we can see the wreck so clearly. We can see that the men didn't fail, the ship did. They did everything they could to keep her afloat, but the structural flaws and the sheer power of the lake were too much. The drone mission proved that the original investigation was wrong to blame the crew. This is a big win for the memory of the sailors. They were heroes who stayed with their ship until the very end, and now we have the evidence to prove it. Yeah, about that, the lake still feels like a place of mystery, even with the drone footage. When you look at the images of the bow sitting in the dark, you realize how small we are. The Fitzgerald is a monument to the power of the Great Lakes. It is a reminder that we must always respect the water, no matter how big our ships get. The drone has finished its work for now, but the story of the Fitzgerald will live on for another 50 years and beyond. Do you think the new drone evidence finally clears the crew's name? Or are there still secrets Lake Superior is hiding from us? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more mysteries.